Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. There's a movement to defund the police. There are protests going on still around all over the country. They were over the weekend. And the topic dominating the Sunday talk shows, what happened in Lafayette Park a week ago? What happened in Washington, D.C. with protesters who were allegedly cleared out to make way for a Trump photo op? That's the narrative, and Bill Barr was on Face the Nation saying that's not the truth.
3 of my CBS colleagues were there. We talked to them. They did not hear warnings. They did not see
there were three warnings. There were three warnings given. But let's get back to why we took that action. On Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, there were violent riots at Lafayette Park, where the park police were under constant attack at behind their bike rack fences. On Sunday, things reached a crescendo. The officers were pummeled with bricks. Crowbars were used to pry up the pavers at the park, and they were hurled at police. There were fires set in not only St. John's Church, but a historic building at Lafayette was burned down.
These were things that looters did.
Not looters. These were the violent rioters who were dominated Lafayette Park.
But what I'm asking about is on Monday, when it was a peaceful protest.
Let me get to this, because this has been totally obscured by the media. They broke into the Treasury Department, and they were injuring police. That night,
Sunday night,
the park police prepared a plan to clear 8th Street and put a larger perimeter around the White House so they could build a more permanent fence on Lafayette.
This is something you approved on Sunday night?
No.
So there's that, and that spawned the reaction from all of these politicized generals. I know there many suggested they were very resistant to comment on politics, but they just couldn't because the Constitution was at stake, including Admiral Stavridis, we've had on the show before, and, of course, Colin Powell. We'll get to Powell. Stavridis on Meet the Press with respect to President Trump's notion that he would scramble the military to quell riots on American streets if the states and governors, if the governors and mayors didn't do their jobs. Didn't happen. Interestingly, too, the Insurrection Act. Should he invoke the Insurrection Act? His Defense Secretary, Mark Esper, said no need to do so. But nobody said it's not a governing statute.
It's an option that the president had.
Admiral Stavridis, though, on his concerns about us moving into banana republic status.
So I spent a lot of time with the governments and the militaries of Latin America and the Caribbean, who, let's face it, have a long history of dictatorships and repression. They've come a long way since the 60s and 70s, but I spent a lot of time talking to those leaders, making sure that they continued on that path. I never thought I would be criticizing my own government in that regard. It's a shocking turn, and to your point, yes, it reduces our moral influence and our leadership role in the world. We had to worry about that deeply.
Mm-hmm. For more on this, we'll see your admiral, and we'll respond with a lieutenant colonel. He is Jim Carafano, president of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation, and author of Wiki at War and Private Sector Public Wars. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
So Powell and Stavridis and Allen and McRaven and others all saying the same thing, that the constitutional crisis was upon us potentially, even though the president only suggested he might do something that he could do under both constitutional and statutory law.
Yeah, so when I come into, first of all, I am not political, and I am not partisan. I work at a nonpartisan foundation, and my only way of coming at this is 25 years in the military, including dealing a lot with issues of what's called military support to civil authorities. 20 years of working on public safety and homeland security issues. So first of all, we have to start with, look at what's going on in our streets. And this is totally ignored. And even that line of questioning with the Attorney General, it's totally ignored that. There are people that are out protesting. They have a lawful right to do that. And indeed, part of the public safety responsibility is ensuring they can protest safely. But there was also violence and rioting in many cities, including Washington, D.C., and there were professional agitators, both at home and overseas, inciting violence, and in some cases in the United States across the political spectrum, actually organizing, not protests, but violence. The U.S. government has a responsibility to deal with all those things because it's responsible to all 330 million Americans. And they can't just pick and choose. And so what a lot of this complaining and finger pointing is about is they're saying, well, they're trying to deal with the protesters. That's terrible. No, they're dealing with the rioters and the agitators. And that's where, when state and local assets are exceeded, where the federal government provides resources to them. And as you pointed out, legally, if state and local governments fail to enforce federal law in their states or cities, which includes basically protecting basic civil rights, people not to get murdered by a looter, the federal government has the authority to step in. People have obscured the fact that the President of the United States never invoked that, because he told the cities and states, if you guys don't do your job, by law, the law says I will have to do it. And everybody, and look at Washington, D.C., where the mayor and the president could not, be more hateful of each other. In Washington, D.C., as soon as they brought in the National Guard and they supplemented local police, the violence and looting vanished overnight, and now we're just back to protesting. So essentially, the president's decision at the end of the day was validated as correct. He did the right thing.
He did. And then also, 16 people died during these riots nationwide. And, shouldn't the president talk about that and, come out and have a national address to talk about racism and talk about these people who died and talk about George Floyd?
Yeah, I think we all should have done that. And we keep saying the president, as if he is the only moral voice in this country. And if he doesn't say exactly what all of us want, then nobody else has any responsibility. Retired generals, mayors, governors, public officials, senators, everybody should be saying, these three things are going on in our street, and we as leaders of this country can only deal with all of them unless we all pull together and work at this. And what did everybody do? Everybody just ran for their own frickin' lifeboat.
And going back to the generals, I just can't leave them quite yet, because it's just really a struggle. And we've had good conversations with some of the names I mentioned on the show when they've been pitching their books and stuff. But it's just so overwrought. The standing in the world, we're reducing our standing with our allies. We're jeopardizing our relationships with our allies. What is the basis to support that contention?
Well, this weekend, or it was Friday, I guess, we had the anniversary at Tiananmen Square. And there could not be a starker difference. When the Chinese Communist Party sends troops to the streets, they're there to control, suppress, and punish the people. If the United States puts military forces on our streets, they're there to protect people's liberty, including the right to protest, and safeguard lives and property. And they operate under competent civilian authority, and they operate consistent with the Constitution. The difference could not be more stark. And if somebody really wanted to draw a contrast between us and the rest of the world, I would say, look at how we deploy our National Guard and how they serve the people, as opposed to what people are doing in the streets of, say, Hong Kong today. So I just think they've got the narrative 100% backwards.
And on China, op-ed by Mike Gallagher in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend, saying what others have said, but it's becoming more of a chorus, like the generals are, for example, that we are in a Cold War with China.
I don't like the term Cold War for so many different reasons, because it invokes containment and all those tools. I like the term great power competition, even though arguably China isn't a power on par with the United States. We are competing with China, but rather than kind of lapse back to the tired rhetoric of the Cold War, we need tools and things that are appropriate for where we are now. We have to get our economy up and running. There's a lot of people that want to do a lot of things on China. Okay, great, fine. But right now, job one is to get our economy and get the American people up and running. Kind of an untold story here, which is you look at all this incredible domestic turmoil, yet arguably, American foreign policy hasn't stopped. The administration's been very tough on the Chinese. They've been consistent on that message. They've been very tough on how the Chinese are dealing with Hong Kong and other issues around the world. So kind of, gold star to the U.S. government to recognizing that, the world doesn't stop turning. And even as we deal with the turmoil here at home, we still have to practice foreign policy.
And to that end, Mike Pompeo accused China of using George Floyd's death, to produce and propagate propaganda in this country. So among the many interests that are trying to foment discord in America, those who are enemies of America or enemies of law and order, I guess we include the Chinese, according to Mike Pompeo.
Yeah, I just kind of, to some extent, laugh some of that out, because if you look at the Chinese propaganda and even the Russian and Iranian disinformations, it's pretty crude and stupid. And, we're so busy yelling at each other. I don't know if we can actually.
Hey, you may be crude to you, but they catfished Jim Comey successfully. So, hey,
Well, there you go.
That's
not a very high bar, but okay.
Yeah, right.
So, James, what do you think about this whole defunding police movement? Starting in Minneapolis with 9 city council members saying they want to defund the police and have social workers respond to, say, domestic violence calls. And now it's spreading in New York, obviously in Chicago and Los Angeles.
Here's the problem.
We may need the U.S. military.
No, here's the problem for me personally. I come from a family of cops. My dad was a cop. My brother, my nephew, my brother-in-law. And they're all to me kind of the penultimate social service. And when you say, I want a social service worker, I want an emergency medical guy. I want somebody that cares. I want some. Cops are all those things, or at least the cops I know. The cops I know are there to help people, and sometimes they were the social worker, or they went and got the social worker. So the notion that cops are somehow the enemy. I wrote a long piece on the anniversary of D-Day on Saturday about people demonizing the military. So it's horrible we have military on our streets. I go, what, are you crazy? Those military people are there on our streets to help everybody, including the protesters. So the demonization of the other, which I guess is the whole great sin of racism, right? That the other is somebody who is not human, somebody who is less than human, somebody who doesn't have the attributes of a human and deserves no respect, that you would take that moniker and you would put it on public safety officials. To me, it just seems like a new form of hate.
He is Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, president of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation. Jim, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks for having me.
Thanks. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
This is attorney Stephen Leahy. This isn't the first crisis we faced together. Back in 2008, business professionals in trouble sought help from bankruptcy attorneys, loan modification attorneys, foreclosure defense attorneys, and IRS attorneys.